Okay, it's here again, and this is going to be the fourth and final work in progress video for the almost said 1/100, 1/75th scale soft vinyl Rick-Dom 2 kit. And as you can see, I have kind of done a test fit of the kit before I actually start weathering, and it's all very, very loose right now. As you can see, his arm just kind of comes off, and the skirt armor and all that stuff. So I basically went ahead and heated up the parts that I would need to apply heat for, and put those together. Like all the lower legs, I had to heat up that purple stub inside the lower leg in order to fit it through this part and then fit it onto the foot. And then I basically had to heat up all the arm parts to be able to put those together. And everything else is going to end up being glued together. So I've got this, took a piece of plot plate and just sort of wrapped it around, put it in there to add some support when I glue the torso onto the waist, because otherwise just glue by itself I don't think was going to be a very strong connection. So added some plot plate there to help with that. So, yeah, I've got my washes and pigments and all that stuff, and it's time to start weathering. Okay, first order of business for the weathering is to weather some of these decals. Right now, the decals, particularly the large ones like this, are nice and clean and pretty and crisp. Well, that's got to change. So I'm just going to take my hobby knife and add some chipping on these decals. I'm not going to go too crazy with it, but I definitely want to damage them a little bit. And I'm not scraping all the way through the paint. I'm using a very, very light touch and just scraping away the decal. So you can see there's still green up under there. I'm just getting that decal out of the way. It's really not that difficult. So I'll just continue doing this with all the decals. Not so much, I'll do it some on the caution markings, but with those just being like little blocks of text, it won't be quite as noticeable on them. But like this one, this will definitely need some damage to it. Alright, so now I am in the middle of doing the wash, and what I'm using for it is I didn't want to use this straight ground brown Mr. Weathering color. This is kind of on the dark side. This is what I usually use, but I wanted to lighten it up and warm it up a bit, so I kind of mixed the ground brown and the sandy wash about 50-50. And then added just a tiny bit of this rust orange weathering pastel pigment powder, and just mixed it up in a little bowl here, and that's what I'm using for my wash. And I've already done the legs, and I think it's turning out really, really good. I really like how that turned out. I just did a rough cleanup, so it left some streakiness and a little grunginess to it. And I'm really, really liking the way that looks. So, looking forward to how it's going to turn out on the rest of the kit. I did thin it a little bit. I don't have any Mr. Weathering color thinner, but I do have some like artist quality odorless mineral spirits. And since the weathering color is oil based, you definitely want to use mineral spirits or paint thinner. So, just going over everything, and I got to make sure to cover pretty much every inch of this kit because there's panel lines everywhere. Do the underside. There's even panel lines on the underside of the skirt armor. Down in here. I didn't think that all three of those thrusters were going to fit when I was attaching them down there, but somehow they managed to. They're just really, really close together. Alright. Probably should be wearing my rubber gloves, but oh well. And then I've just got a paper towel. Just going to wipe that down. And just kind of generally go in a downward motion. So that'll give you that nice streaking effect. And you can wipe away a little bit, or you can wipe away a lot, or you can wipe away practically all of it, depending on the level of dirtiness that you want your gunpla to have. And I'm doing a moderate wipe down, because I don't want it to be super dirty, but I also don't want it to be super clean. I want there to still be a little bit of streakiness and a little bit of grunginess to it. So see how those streaks are kind of naturally forming whenever you pull down with the paper towel? That's what I'm looking for. It's a little bit harder in some of these like nooks and crannies down here, so you just have to kind of get the paper towel in there and work it around so you can get all that excess wash out. But what you're left with looks pretty darn good. I may go in, oh wait, that's the wrong brush, that's the one I was using for thinner. I may go in later and accentuate some of these panel lines with like a pen wash. But overall looks good, and it's going to change the tone of your paint job, especially if you don't wipe very much away. It's warmed up that green quite a bit. Like there's the skirt armor and the back skirt, they're the same shade of green paint, but as you can see when I do put the wash on it, it's got a slightly warmer tone to it, and that's kind of what I was going for. So quite happy with this. Now I just gotta finish up the rest of the kit. Alright, so I am getting to work on the chipping now. I'm going to do two different shades of chipping. First off, I'm starting with a light, this is just acrylic paint. I'm basically simulating primer. And what this is going to be is just where the paint job has chipped away down to the primer layer, but not all the way down to the bare metal. So I'm going to do this in a few places, being pretty conservative with it. Don't want to get too crazy. Just along the leading edges. Like the protrusions and things, like this little red thing sticking off his forehead. Do some primer chipping there. And like the elbows, these pointy elbows are going to be bumping into stuff, so definitely want to put some there. Alright, so now that I've got the sponge chipping out of the way, I'm just going in with a paintbrush and adding a few bigger, if I can actually get it on camera, adding a few bigger chips, not a lot. Because what I want to do is have these areas of exposed primer, and then inside those areas I'll go in with a brush and do some bare metal color. And I think that's going to look really, really nice. So I'm just focusing on this brush chipping on the most exposed protruding edges, like this right here where the skirt armor pops out on the side, along the back here. This back skirt pokes out really far, so that's going to bump into a lot of stuff. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I've mixed up kind of basically metallic black, gold, and copper to make sort of a bronzy, basically metallic brown kind of color. Because I want it to look like bare metal, but I also want it to look kind of rusty. And so now in these larger chips that I made previously, I'm going in with this dark brownish metallic color and adding some bare metal. And the effect that's going to give is you're going to have the bare metal chips, but with a thin primer edge going around it. And that's going to give these chips a lot more dimension. Let me zoom in on this. Might be too close. Anyway, there, you get the idea. And that's just going to give this a lot more character, a lot more dimension, and a bit more realism. Because I've seen other modelers do this, and I always love the way it looks, and seeing as how I'm putting quite a bit of effort into the paint job on this kit, I wanted to make sure I did the chipping as well as I possibly could. So, taking my time with this, just going nice and slow, trying not to overdo things, trying not to rush, because this is a pretty special, unique kit, and I want to give it a really good paint job. I want to give it my best. Okay, and now I'm going to do not really a weathering technique, but this is something I've never done before, but I wanted to give it a try. I'm going to put a couple of filters on some of these armor panels. I've got a lot of places on this kit where there's like armor panels, really good looking panel line work, and you know, traditionally you can do masking to mask off those different panels and spray them different colors. Alternatively, you can use a filter. Now what a filter is this is oil paint that I've got here on this piece of cardboard. Put it on the cardboard to kind of leach out some of the oil so it's not quite so oily. Helps it dry a little bit faster. And what I've done is I've thinned it quite a bit with some good quality Artist's mineral spirits to where it's very, very transparent. Thinner than a wash. I mean, I'd say it's probably a good 80% thinner at least to 20% paint. And I've got a small flat brush here. And what I'm going to do is just carefully go over one of these panels. And the goal of this technique is, like I said, not really weathering, but just to give a slightly different tint of color to an area on the kit. I'm using this flat brush so I can get it as nice and uniform and even as I can. See now, like, if you ignore the glossiness because the paint's wet obviously, but here you can get it out of the light. As you can see now, it's got a slightly bluish tint to it. It's a cooler green than the warmer green around it, and that's a quick and relatively easy way to get different colored panels on your kits without having to do a lot of masking and airbrushing. And the success of this technique is really going to depend on your thinner to paint ratio and the steadiness of your hand, because the key is to make that look as even as you can. Alright, so now I've got two panels on the back skirt that are a slightly different shade of green, a more bluish green than the rest of the panels. Let's see, let me clean off my brush real quick. And I'll try out one of the other colors. Alright, let's see. I'm going to go out on a limb and try this red filter. Red can be a really, really strong color, so I'm going to take some of that out on the paper towel. Let's see, where do I, here, I'm going to do it on the head. Head's got a lot of nice panel lines on it. Nice rectangular panel right here on the back of the head. It's quick and easy. And actually, I might have gotten this a little bit too thin. Go over that a little bit more. And since red and green are complementary colors, it's going to brown that out, dull it out a little bit. So you can see now it's slightly different shade of green there. And you could also take the green filter, do the same thing with, let's say, this panel right here. And it's not going to make a huge difference, seeing as how it's already green, but you can tell a bit of a difference. It's a bit more of a yellowish green, kind of a bright spring green, compared to the adjacent panel next to it. So that's just a fun little technique, something to play around with. Again, I hadn't done it before and I wanted to give it a try, so I figured why not. Alright, one last thing that I want to do, well, not last, but maybe second to last. Anyway, since I've painted the bazooka in gunmetal, kind of gives the indication that it's not actually quote-unquote painted in terms of the make-believe Gundam world, whatever. It's bare metal, so I can't really do paint chipping on something that's bare metal, but what I can do is dry brushing. So I've already done some shading on these bazooka parts, and what better way to really make the details pop out than to lightly dry brush over everything, so that way all those dark edges that I did the shading on are now going to have that light little bit of silver on the edges, just give it that worn look. And that's just what I want to go for. And I think this will look really, really nice. Don't need to go overboard. I've got very, very little paint on the brush right now. Most of it I've dabbed off on this paper towel. So that's why I'm able to really go all over this piece like this without really leaving a whole lot of paint on the part. And that's going to leave all those little edges and details highlighted with that little bit of silver Let's see if we can zoom in. Maybe get that out of the way. It really turned out super nice on the front half of the bazooka, especially like on the handle here and those old vents right there. That dry brushing looks really, really nice. So I think that's going to work out pretty darn well. Alright, so last but not least, I'm adding a little bit of pigments. I've actually already added them. Just took my Mr. Weathering pastel pigment powders and applied those to a little bit of paint thinner. Let them dry completely. And now I'm just using a Q-tip to blur these, make them not quite so dramatic, just to give a nice dusty dirt effect around the bottom of the feet. Don't want to rub them away completely, but I definitely want to knock those down from where they're at right now. And if you try to do this when they're still wet, they smear and it can get really, really messy. So that's why I like to let these dry completely before I do this. Makes the transition a lot softer and a lot more natural looking, or more dusty looking anyway. If you let it stay wet and don't blend it as much, it'll give more of a wet, muddy look, but I wanted kind of a dusty dirt look, so I let them dry, and it's giving it a much nice, softer gradation, which is going to give more of the illusion of dust rather than mud. I just use two different shades just to add a little variation in there. Also, I added some black pigment around the thrusters to give the illusion of soot. Also got a little bit around some of these vents back here as well. And just kind of doing the same thing, going over that with the Q-tip to soften that. Okay, and after top coating and final assembly, the soft vinyl Rick Dom 2 is finally finished, and I gotta say, I'm quite happy with how this guy turned out. It's not perfect, there are a few things that could have done better, but overall, I'm really, really pleased with this. I think as I've been showing updates for this thing on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, most people have noticed that the multicolor Max Watanabe technique I did underneath the green has kind of disappeared after all the layers of paint and weathering, and I do agree with that. I think that last layer of highlighting I did on the green parts kind of killed the rainbow color underneath. So A little unfortunate for this kit, but that'll be something to keep in mind for the next time I try that technique. There are a few places, like I said in the last video, I think, where the rainbow dots kind of still show through, but with that little last bit of highlighting I did, and then with the weathering on top of it, it does get a bit lost. So, but that's an easy thing to correct for, because really all I got to do is just not use quite as many layers. I think I used 3 layers of the green paint, so maybe knock it down to 2 layers, and it should make the Max Watanabe technique a bit more noticeable. I'm actually really happy with my weathering. Don't want to toot my own horn, but all the weathering came out really good. I got a little bit carried away with the rust streaking. I had mixed some brown oil paint with my rust colored pigments, and it was really intense. It actually looks really good on the front skirts here, but on the legs the rust pigment came out really intense, and I had to spend quite a bit of time with some odorless mineral spirits to wipe that away and knock that down, because like as you can see here, it looks kind of rough on the back of the legs, but it looks a lot better than it did when I first did it. So I had to spend a bit of time correcting that. And just the streaking in general I think is not my best, but everything else, the wash, the chipping came out really good. Did a bit of dry brushing on the bazooka. I think that came out really well. And the filter panels that I did turned out pretty good. Nice and subtle, as like you can see the red panels there and the blue panel there. You can see these kind of yellow-green panels on the back of the legs. It's not a big difference, but it's just enough to be noticeable. And I think that was a really cool effect. So overall, I'm quite happy with this guy. I forgot to mention, I didn't actually show earlier, I simply used one of these wave HIs with a silver sticker behind it for the mono eye. So that's what I did for that. Also on the bazooka's camera as well. So I think I've covered just about everything there is to cover with this kit. My first time doing a vinyl kit, and I have to say it was a lot of fun. It wasn't as difficult as I anticipated. It was about the same amount of difficulty as doing a resin kit, but it's just got a nice chunky heft to it that I think is really attractive, and it's a nice larger scale. It's in between 1 to 100 and 1/60th scale. I wish I'd brought a kit here for a size comparison, but I didn't. But you get the idea. So I guess that does it for this work in progress video and this project, and now I can start on my next project. So with that, I'll see you guys next time.